Hello, 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 hello. So, hello everybody. Welcome back to another ZClassroom live stream. So give me a chat and a comment in the chat there if you can hear me and see me. So my hair is getting longer. At some point it needs to get cut. So today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on some more kind of processes, starting from say the ZBrush trial, and then trying to get through a little project through the entire 2-hour stream here. For today, we're going to dive in pretty deep. So we're going to go into a functionality inside of ZBrush that's one of the deformers, and it's one of the most advanced deformers. So when you select it and use it, it has a lot of complexity to it, and it ends up creating some really cool stuff if you figure out how to use it. Now with this, for today's session, it's kind of going to be all about happy accidents and creating concept arts for vehicles. So it's not going to be anything that's like, hey, I have this and I want to mimic it. It's going to be more, I want to design something using ZBrush and using this feature. With this feature too, I mispronounce it all the time. So one quest for you guys today is to keep track of how many times I say it incorrectly. So the feature itself is called the projection primitive, or project primitive, and I will often call it the project primitive. So I want to see, you guys need to keep track of how many times I say it incorrectly and let me know. I do need a spa day after this. So hello Carlos, hello Webetchen, Salman, Mosen. Nice to see you all again. All right, so start off, I'm gonna go for my little spiel here. So if you have anyone that is looking to do some ZBrushing or maybe interested in ZBrush, the ZBrush 2020 version trial is out. So you can log over to pixologic.com ZBrush/trial, and you can download the 2020 trial. It is full, has all the full features in it, and the only restriction is it's only gonna last for 30 days. So if you wanna try out the software and see how it works, you can follow along with these streams. Definitely pop on over and grab the trial. You can get the trial for Macintosh and also Windows. It will not work on iOS. So if you have an iPad and you're trying to use the trial on the iPad, it will not work on iOS. Another thing quickly with ZBrush, there's multiple ways to get into ZBrush. So if you're sculpting at home and learning, and then eventually you try the trial and you find out you like it, we have multiple avenues to get into the software. So we offer subscription-based things, and then also a perpetual license. For our perpetual license, we've never charged for an upgrade. So if you bought ZBrush once, you've gotten free upgrades for all the new features that go in pretty much every year, and you haven't paid a cent. So I bought ZBrush years ago and never have paid for anything. So even before I worked for Pixologic, I picked up the software, and then I've just had free upgrades since then. In addition to this, the version I'll be showing today is the professional version, so it has a lot of features in it, and the feature we're going to go into, the projection primitive, is definitely ZBrush professional only, but we do offer ZBrush Core as well, which is our light version of ZBrush, and this comes even down to cheaper monthly subscriptions and also perpetual licenses, and there is an upgrade path from the perpetual license to the full version, and so we give you a discount if you bought ZBrush Core and then you want to upgrade your license from Core to the professional version. Solomon and Daisuke are doing some streams on ZBrush Core, so if you want to see what that looks like in action compared to what I'm doing in my streams or what Paul does in his streams, you can definitely tune into their streams, and you'll see over here, down here, right here on my screen there's a little link that'll pop up for when they're going to be streaming. So you'll see Solomon's face pop up and also Daisuke's, so you can go in there and watch their streams. All right. So web etching is asking what's the difference between Maya deformers and ZBrush deformers. So that's a good question. There's a lot of things. So we have a lattice deformer, which is your common deformer that Maya has, but then ZBrush has a whole bunch of other deformers. So it's not really, and we call them deformers, but there's a lot of things in there you can do with them. So it's not like you're just strict lattice deformer. And the one I'm going to show you today is just insane. But it really gives some really cool results, some nice happy accidents, and you can create some really quick vehicle concepts on that. Now for this stream too, I'm going to mention this later on as well, but there is a ZClassroom lesson on the projection primitives too. And so you can go to ZClassroom and follow along with this as well. And this is going to go more into a lot of the functionality of it and how to use it and actually generate something that's a little more kind of, I had a full idea and I kind of want to flesh it out. So the stuff I'm going to show today is we're going to look at a lot of happy accidents. I'm going to see something I'm like and I'm going to go with it, and then we're just going to configure it out that way. but there is a whole ZClassroom set there you can go to and watch. So if you find out, you watch the stream and you want to find out more about it or get another tutorial set up on that, go to ZClassroom and look up the project primitive there. All right, so I'm going to hop over to ZBrush here, and we're going to handle this again just like the process we've done before. So you've just downloaded the trial and you've installed it, and this is what you get here. Today we're also going to be using the ZBrush to Keyshot Bridge, which there is a trial on that page as well where you can download. It's at the lower page there, so if you go to the page for the ZBrush trial, if you scroll down, there's a bridge trial you can grab too. And then I will also be using the trial of Keyshot. So Keyshot 9 has a trial too, and I'm going to be using that. So everything today on my machine here is kind of running in trial format. So the first thing I want to do is I have ZBrush launched, and this is what I'm going to be greeted with. So at the top here we have this kind of display bar, and this is called Lightbox. If this isn't open when you launch, you can come up here and toggle this button right here or press comma on your keyboard. Now Lightbox, you can think of it as like the Adobe Bridge, okay? So in here is a viewer that will allow you to see thumbnails of all the ZBrush files. So the ZBrush file formats are what we call usually the ZPR files or ZTL files. So one is ZBrush project and one is ZBrush tool. And pretty much this is the only way you're gonna be able to get a preview of those files. So you can see in Lightbox here, I'll get a preview of what that file contains. So this is handy, especially for browsing ZBrush files, because you can go to a folder. You can see the location of where you're at down here at the bottom, and then you can store all your files in one folder and then access it through here, and then you'll be able to get a preview of what's in those files. Another thing with Lightbox here that I haven't mentioned before in the streams, but if you create a shortcut, like a shortcut file, so if you make a folder on your desktop and then you right-click on it and create a shortcut link, you can then place that link in one of these folders in Lightbox. So if you go to, say, the Pixologic ZBrush 2020.1.3/Z projects folder, and then you copy that shortcut link in there, that will show up in here, and then you can use that link to go directly to that folder. So if you have files on, say, an external drive or maybe on a cloud storage somewhere, you can come through and create a link to that folder on your machine, so it doesn't have to be in the Pixologic directory for the ZBrush directory, and then you can just quickly link to that, and then that will be able to work with Lightbox here and show you previews of all those files. So it's handy, especially if you have a lot of assets. And when you're using ZBrush, oftentimes you'll create stuff and then you can reuse stuff all the time. So I have libraries on a few drives. They're just all little bits and pieces and everything else. And if I need something, I can just reference them quick. And I just use Lightbox for that here. So today I'm going to start off with just the standard dynamesh sphere primitive here. So I'm just going to come across this and just double click, and this is going to load this project in. Now when you see this project loads in, it's already going to be placed into edit mode, so you could just come right in and start sculpting like normally. Now navigation quick inside of ZBrush can be done. There's some little options over here. There's a move, zoom, and rotate. So if you're new to ZBrush, you can come over and use this to move, this to zoom, and this to rotate. There's also ways you can control this on your canvas. So clicking and dragging outside your model will perform a rotate. If you hold down the Alt key, and I've simplified my keyboard today too, so it's smaller. Look at that. You can hold down the Alt key and then click and drag, and that will allow you to pan. And then for the complex kind of zoom in and out for the Alt click navigation, you want to hold down Alt, click off the canvas, release Alt, and then drag, and that will perform that zoom. If you're new to ZBrush, you can come over here and use this zoom option here, which is a little bit easier because this is definitely a little bit of a finger click kind of complex item there. And then in some of the other earlier ZClassroom live streams, we've been doing these developer streams since this pandemic started, so you can catch up on the one for sculpting a bust, and I go in a lot more detail to the navigation processes. And then we also have some getting started videos on ZClassroom as well, which will go through navigation too. So if you run into any hurdles on that, definitely check out those, and hopefully they'll help you along. All right, so for today, I'm going to take my sphere here, and I first just want to convert it to a shape that looks kind of like a car. So today we're going to be designing cars, and we're going to be using the project primitive function, which is a deformer located in the Gizmo 3D. So that sounds like a lot, but I'm going to try to walk you guys through it so you understand it. So first with my sphere here, I'm going to go to the tool palette, and I want to convert this sphere to a cube. And to do this, I'm going to come down here to the initialize palette and open this up. And in here we have some options to convert the current subtool I have selected to either a cube, a sphere, a grid, or a cylinder. Now these little resolution sliders down here will allow you to determine how much resolution that object gets when you create it. So right now it's set to 222. So if I click the Q-cube option, it's going to take my sphere here and convert it to a cube. And then if I come down here and turn on my polyframes, you can see it's giving me 2 by 2. If I change this to 4 by 4 by 4, it would give me 4 by 4. If I wanted to do it in a rectangle, I could do that as well. So that's what these little resolution things down here are. And then whatever I click in this area is going to convert that model to that primitive. So you can see there's grid, there's sphere, and cube. And it's totally going to replace the subtool you have, so make sure when you do that, that you know that it is going to replace the one you have on screen. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my floor grid. This is just going to allow me to see my mesh like so. And now I want to distort this cube a little bit, and to do this I'm going to use the Gizmo 3D. So I can come up here and click on Move, Scale, or Rotate, and when I click on this, I should now get the universal Gizmo 3D here. And this is a universal manipulator, so I can scale, I can move, and I can also rotate that mesh on screen. If you make a mistake inside of ZBrush anytime, you can hit Control-Z, and that will undo that process. Now for the cube here, I'm going to turn off perspective, and I just want to scale it out, so I want to make it kind of a flattish rectangle, so something like this. So all I'm doing here is I'm coming across the scale options on this gizmo and performing those actions. So I'm getting this kind of shape here. So I'm looking at generating a car basically, so I want to think of the overall shape of that design. So it's going to be just the entire kind of vehicle there. So now that I have this, I want to just apply some divisions to it, and this is going to take the geometry I have and it's going to divide it up. So what this means is, if I get on draw here, I go to tool and then go to geometry. If I divide, it's going to look at the topology I have, and when you click it, it's going to add an edge loop in between all these edges. And so it's going to give me more topology. So it's taking what I have and it's dividing it, adding more. And when it does this process, if I have this SMT option on, it's going to apply a smooth. So this is going to take the shape and it's going to add more topology to it and then smooth it a little bit. And it's going to kind of give me this nice soft shape. So I'm going to come over here and click divide, and you can see this is what is happening here. So it's added these edges. And if you come up here and click delete lower, you can see those. So this is what subdivisions are inside of ZBrush. And I'm just going to click divide a few times to add some more polygons here. And I'm going to turn off the polyframe so I can kind of see that shape. So this is going to be my starting shape here for working with this deformer. After I'm happy with this, I'm just going to come over here and just click delete lower. So now I just have this as a primitive. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to just maybe scale this out a little bit more. So I'm coming back up here to move, scale, or rotate, get that Gizmo 3D, and maybe just adjust it some. So it's a little bit too thin there, but now I've got a little bit of more kind of elongated form. So when using this deformer, basically you want to start with this piece of geometry like this. So this is a very simplistic shape. I just took that cube, I modified it, and I added some tessellation to it using subdivisions. I'm going to get a drink of water here. All right, so now I want to locate this deformer. Now the deformers inside of ZBrush are all accessed through the Gizmo 3D. So if you are in draw mode like this and you're doing some sculpting, if you want to access these deformers, you first need to come up here and click Move, Scale, or Rotate. Then you need to make sure this Gizmo 3D option is turned on. It should be turned on by default, but if you toggle it off, you'll get the transpose line. And in order to use the deformers, you need to make sure you're in the Gizmo mode. And when you're in the Gizmo 3D mode, now you come across and there's a Customize button right here, and this is next to some of the other options you have with the Gizmo 3D. And when you click this, it's going to open a dialog. And in this dialog here, we have a bunch of primitives that we can change our shape to if we want to. And then down below this, we have all the deformers. So there are some in here that are very similar to, say, Max or Maya. So we have the deformer, and this one's going to give you that lattice kind of shape. So if you click on this, this is what you're going to get. And then you can change this and modify it and manipulate your form now with less points, so using a lattice deformer. And this is one of your more common ones that you'll see in other applications. Now at any time if you want to get rid of the deformer or accept it, you just go back to this gear icon. In here you have this full reset button which will reset it 100%. You have a delete which will delete it. You have just another reset, and then you have an accept too. So this full reset is going to come into play with this projection deformer. For this one here, it's not going to be too much reset wise, but that's where they are located. So when I talk about, hey, I need to go reset this, this is what I'll be pulling up here. So I don't really want this deformer anymore, so the lattice one, so I'm just gonna click delete, and that's now gonna remove it, and I'm gonna get back to where I am. So we had a question to ask, is that really water? Yes, sadly it's really water. Guys, I already drank my cups of coffee today, and then it's not beer o'clock yet, so later it will be beer. All right, so I'm gonna go back in this menu, so Gizmo 3D, so clicking on Move, Scale, Rotate, getting the universal Gizmo 3D manipulator here, and then clicking on Customize, and then in here I wanna locate the projection primitive. Now once again, I'm gonna say project primitive in here instead of projection, so keep a track of that because I'm gonna for sure mispronounce this like all the way through the stream. So I'm gonna come down here and activate this. Now, when you activate this, you're gonna get craziness, all right? So we have something going on here in the middle, and we've got all these cones. So this is the most advanced deformer that ZBrush has, and if you've never touched it before, or maybe you've come across it and opened it up and just been like overwhelmed, right? There's a lot going on here, and it's one of those things that after you know kind of what it does, you can then come in there and manipulate the different items. But if you have no clue and you open this up, it's gonna just be like, what is happening? So one helpful thing with all these cones here, so a lot of these colors to me all blend together, so I'm not gonna go by color options for when I'm describing this, because most of these colors are just, they kind of look similar to me. So with this, if you hover over any of these, you're gonna see it's gonna give a description down on the bottom here. So as right underneath the gizmo, right about here, you'll see as I hover over this, it's going to give me these different options. So there's different deformers depending on what you have kind of hover over. So this one box here in the middle is going to deform basically the shape that you have selected. So we have these ones up here which will blend, new surface, and accept. And then over here we have some different axis and primitive types, and then a modifier. And then on this side we have some symmetry options right here. And then on this side we have some more controllers for opacity. And then we also have some tessellation, displacement, opacity, and grouping. So they're kind of broken up into these little sections. And all these cones will always stay grouped together. So you're never gonna have the, say, new surface cone gonna be over here with the symmetry cones. The symmetry cones are always gonna be on their own little island off in space. But there is these 4 groups of cones here. The next thing we have are these little white pips that are around the object as well. And these we're going to use quite a bit too, and these allow you to change or clip the shape. So if you think of, say, the Gizmo 3D, if you ever use if you're familiar with ZBrush, if you go to move and you hold down control, I think it's move, it might be scale, and it'll allow you to clip the surface of the object. So it's going to take the geometry and smash it in. And so that's what these little white circles are going to allow you to do too. So we'll use those as well. So the basic principle here is that for this deformer, I have my initial shape, and then I'm adding a new shape to this. And the shape, instead of adding to the model, it's going to apply a projection. So it's taking the shape and projecting it to the mesh. So if you have this shape here, and now this is my little part, the sphere, it's projecting the sphere into this surface. So that's why you can see this bulge up top and the bulge at the bottom. So it's taking the surface I had and now it's projecting this primitive to it. So this topology I'm getting around here is the topology from my original object, okay? So it's just applying this projection. Now, if I move this, you'll see it's gonna adjust how this projection happens. So as I go up and down, you're gonna see it's gonna change this projection. Now, if it's in the middle, this is always going to, if it's the halfway point of the object is embedded into the surface of the current object, it's going to bulge it out. If I pull the object out of the surface, it's now going to cut it in. So this is the kind of 2 processes of how it's going to project. If the center of your object is out of your existing model, it's going to give you this dent or cut into the surface, so it's pushing the projection inward. But then if your object is in the middle of the other surface, then it's going to project outward. So a key thing there, it's all going to depend on how this works. It's all going to depend on where the center of the object you're messing with is in relation to your current mesh, okay? So just hold on to that thought because we're going to be doing a lot of that. So now if I scale this, so just think of the manipulation process here. I'm just manipulating this. So I can manipulate the shape by scaling. I can go this way, I can go this way. I can also move it. So I'm just using the Gizmo 3D options here, and I can rotate as well. So those are the basic controls of this shape that I'm now projecting onto this other mesh. Now, to get a visual of what is happening too, it helps to turn this on. So if it's your first time, this is what you're gonna be greeted with, right? So as someone said in the chat here, we got boxy Saturn, right? So it's hard to see, you know, what kind of object is projecting onto the other surface. So as I do this, I can kind of get the sense that this is, say, a sphere. But let's see what it looks like in reality. So if I come over here and go to the upper corner here, where we have these three cones, so we have blend, new surface, and accept. I'm gonna go to the new surface one, and to activate these cones, you just need to hover over them. It'll tell you what it is down at the bottom of the Gizmo 3D here, and then click and drag, and that's going to allow you to activate that process. So as you can see, as I went from new surface 0 to 1, I can now see this mesh, right? Well, if I can get it there, there we go. And this is the object that's being projected. So not only can you, say, subtract or manipulate the shape internally, but you can also add to it. So if I want to just add this, I just would change my new surface slider here from that 0 to 4, and now I'm basically just using this as an insert mesh. So I'm taking my model and I'm just inserting it as I would a normal IMM brush. So now with this, you can now see what other options we have or how this controls. So over here in this process here, we had those primitive types, and we also have a modifier. So everyone is going to have a modifying aspect, and as you change this, it's going to change that primitive shape. So as you can see here with this sphere, which was primitive 1, if I change my modifier all the way up, I'm going to get a box. If I change it all the way down, I'm going to get this star. So these primitives here are kind of smart primitives too, so as you manipulate them, they're going to change, right? And then that's just primitive type 1, which is that sphere. So the sphere will go from a I don't even know what you call this, an 8-sided die to a sphere and then to a cube. So that is what the primitive 1 will do. Now if I switch this to primitive 2, this is now going to give me this shape, and then I can change the modifier here, and this will go to cylinder, and then to this, to cones, and then back to a middle ground as well. So primitive 2 is going to give you a cylinder shape, and then primitive 3 is going to give you something like this. And so these are all just different shapes inside this deformer. And so they're just based on whatever you have select, and then you can modify these quickly like so. Now I don't expect you to come through and know all these, because I certainly do not. I can use it, but I don't end up coming through and being like, okay, I know that I want primitive 4, which is now this, and I want my modification to be at 0.11, and that's going to give me what I want. So I use this more as like a conceptual tool, so I know that the 4th one is definitely a cone, and now I'm just moving this and changing the shape here. So if you've just learned in here, today we're going over the projection primitive. And this is a deformer. So to access this, let me just delete this here so I can get back to my normal shape, is if you have your mesh here, you just want to come up here and activate Move, Scale, or Rotate to get your Gizmo 3D. Then we're going to go into the Customize menu here, and in here there is the projection primitive. And we're going to click on this, and this is now going to pop up, and you're going to get a whole bunch of cones. Now if it's your first time in here, I'm just going to reset this. This is what you should be greeted with. So I just created a piece of geometry and then activated this deformer. So Randy's asking, what is this mode displaying? So what you have, whenever you click over these things, any of these cones, it's going to tell you what's going to happen on these cones down the bottom. So what I was doing a second ago was that I took my shape that I'm using as projection, and I've set this to new surface so I can see what's happening. So I've just changed the new surface cone right there. And then now you can see this is the default object, which is a sphere. And then with this, we have a primitive type cone. And if you change this, it will change the shape of that primitive. So you can see as I scroll through here, I'll be able to get the spheres, and then we also have a cylinder, and then I also have a ring. So we can go through and use these processes, okay? So that is what we're doing there. And so I was just changing the primitive types to kind of show you guys what primitive types are available, because when we switch into some later, like the ones I mostly use will be the sphere one here, and then the other one I use quite a bit is this ring. So those are the two go-tos that I end up using most of the time when I'm manipulating things like this to generate a car shape. So Sculptures Pro will work with deformers. You just need to be out of the deformer mode. So you can mess with the shape, generate the object you want, and then just get out of the deformer. So to exit the deformer, you just go back to the customize menu here and you can just click accept and it'll give you what you have, or you can click delete and it'll return back to what happened, what you had before it. And then after that, you can go up to draw, activate Sculptures Pro and use it. But in terms of how you use this deformer, you're not really sculpting on your model at this stage. You're manipulating a primitive to deform the surface. So we're taking primitives and then manipulating it through it. We've got one question asking, is there a way to make the toolpit appear at the mouse, the one that tells you what each cone does, or eternally toggle levels next to the cones? So no, currently the only way to get a description of what the cone is doing is going to be always displayed on the bottom of the Gizmo 3D. And that's the same for just doing any of the manipulation. So it's always going to be underneath the Gizmo 3D there. So as you hover over these cones, you're going to have to look at that Gizmo 3D. All right, so now I'm going to start deforming my shape here. So now we've got a brief rundown on what kind of primitives are in this project deformer. And then we're going to come over here and I'm going to change new surface to 0. And this is going to give me back my initial process here. And I first want to come through and just want to start deforming this. So my goal today is to generate a car, right? So I want some sort of car design. And with this, it's going to be all conceptual. It's going to be all happy accident. And I'm going to see something I like, and then we're just going to keep going along that route. And so I'm kind of going to walk you guys through how to do this. So with this here, I want to start making my car. And the first things I want to kind of hit on are, say, like the entire body shape of it, and then I want to do wheel wells. Those are like the two kind of core things I want to change my shape to. So with my shape here, you can see I have this sphere, and if I move this along, you can see it's going to deform it. And I can scale this shape down, I can scale it out, and you can see how I can start designing the brief shape of this car. So I have like some sort of window paneling there, I maybe have a back. I can move this around, right? So I can get like, you know, some sort of design profile-wise that's fitting what I'm kind of looking for. So oftentimes I'll just play with this and just move this around and see what it's going to give me, because sometimes you get some really nice kind of happy accidents as you're doing this. Now we talked briefly about these little white circles here, and this is going to allow us to clip or pull that shape. So right now I have this shape really round, but if I come to this white circle over here, which is called size, and I start pushing it in, you're going to see it's going to change that primitive that I'm projecting with. So I can actually taper this down. And so if I want that car to have a back, I kind of like this, I've just gone through and moved this, and I've just trimmed that off. If I want to adjust, say, the other way, I can do the same thing. And so you can see I can just use these to add a little different style to it. While you're doing this, if you don't want to see the polyframes and your lines, you just can come down here and disable these little options on the polyframes. So if I turn this on and say turn off line, I'm just going to get the coloring. And if I turn this off, I'm going to get nothing. So if that bothers you while you're doing this, you can definitely go down to that polyframe area and change that. So now I'm just going to see the polyframe coloring as I process my model here. And then it's not going to show me the geometry anymore. So that would be a pretty good first shape there. Like I just added it and now I like that kind of back. So I have some sort of, you know, rear kind of hatchback maybe design to this. The next thing, we have a bottom one down here, and so my car is currently kind of going down like this. And I don't want this to penetrate or project under the surface, so I'm going to grab this size one and move it up. And you can see if I move it up far, I now get another kind of design aspect going on here. So maybe some sort of, you know, area down here where I have an undercarriage now, and then I have this part floating on top. So volley, yes, this is the projection primitive, and what it's doing, it's taking an object and it's projecting it into the surface of your mesh. And as it does this, you can control kind of the softness or angles on this through different cones, and then this will allow you to hold shapes, change shapes. So it's like an organic hard surface modeling technique. So now I have this, and you can see I'm getting some tessellation through here, and this will all depend on how dense your model was initially before you send it in here. Now you have a ability to come through and kind of clean this up or refine it, and I'm going to turn my line option back on here. And that can be done by using, let me find the cone here, this tessellation cone. So this will live right here, and it's just called tessellate. And if you click and drag this, this is going to come through, and it's going to add geometry to that primitive you're projecting. So this is kind of going to give you that little similar effect to Tessellate or Sculptures Pro, where it's going to go through and look at what you're projecting, and now it's going to add resolution just to that area. So if I do this now, I'm going to end up getting a cleaner shape, right? So I no longer have that tessellation happening there, and I'm getting a little nicer result on that car design. You also have some other sliders we can play with too. So these are the displacement and opacity ones, and this is just going to change how that shape is being projected. So oftentimes I'll come over and I'll just hit these and just see what kind of different result I get. I'm going to turn off my line option over here in polyframes again so I can just see the shape of the model. And if I turn on opacity, you see I can kind of blend this in and out. And then the displacement one, you see it's totally changing that kind of design there. So now it's taking the roof and cutting it off a little bit, right? So now I almost have this kind of front area and back area, right? So if I wanted glass on both those sides, I know I can kind of move this down or find where I want it there and then change this maximum displacement, and this is going to scale or change that effect. So there's a lot of little cones. Basically the best process for using this deformer is just to play around with them and just see what it gives you. And if you don't go in, trying to obtain the 100% absolute design you're looking for, but rather use it as, oh, I like that, let's go with that, you're going to be a lot happier using this deformer. So now that I have this one shape, this looks pretty good here. I'm happy with that. I need to accept that. And when you accept it, what's it going to do? It's going to take the primitive that I'm currently projecting, it's going to lock that into place, and then it's going to allow me to use it somewhere else. So I can take one and then keep going. So yes, Randy, it's going to only allow you to use one at a time. So if I can only manipulate one primitive at a time. Now you can use symmetry, which we're going to use for the wheels here, which will allow you to manipulate one, but it's going to be symmetrical. So then you can kind of get like bulges, like 2 on the side and 2 on the side, and go from there. So I'm going to accept this, and to accept it, you just need to find the cone that's over here. So this is the one, we got blend, we got new surface, and we got accept. So I'm just going to accept the shape I have, and that's currently this one here that's giving me this top portion, right? So I'm projecting that shape. So I'm going to click accept, that's going to be locked in, and now it's giving me pretty much the same space. So I have another primitive that's in the same space, that's the exact one I just accepted. But now I can manipulate this one, so if I move it off, you can see now I'm changing the design some more, right? So I've just taken that one I had, and now I'm projecting it again as this new shape. Now here's where part of the kind of fun comes into play, because I can use this shape and position it and see what it's doing elsewhere, right? So I know I had this sliced line for, say, an undercarriage, but now I can manipulate this more, maybe get some sort of design like this, maybe some sort of hood area right through there, so some sort of futuristic car. And then I can even give it like a front air dam type thing, maybe rotate it up or down to see what that looks like, maybe get some scale on that. And I'm just modifying that existing one and just changing it up to see if there's anything in here that I like. So you're really not kind of restricted to what you're doing. And the best thing here for this is to just play with it, right? So just experiment with it, see what the designs are going to give you. Then once again, I come over here and I can modify these displacement and opacity sliders here. And this is going to allow me to change how that process looks too. So just hover over these and click and drag, and I can change it. So if I don't want that to be as harsh, I can change that opacity one, and then the displacement one I can change as well. And this is going to give me a different shape. So now I can get some sort of detailed lines through here, maybe a little body line that's cutting in. So now I have this kind of shape going through, which will help maybe pick up some light later on when I go to render this. Let's see if I can get that to do a little bit different stuff there. So now we got that. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that as well. And so now I have 2 of those. And now you can see I have that other primitive there, so I can move it up and kind of position it around, see if there's anything happening with that, just taking it again and just reapplying it quickly to kind of see what I get. And oftentimes you'll end up with something you like, and then you can modify it and keep going that way. So this is giving some interesting things. Maybe bump this up a little bit. So we'll accept that too. And this is all just happy accident mode. Now the next thing I want to reset this, right? So I've got this shape here, and if I come up here and turn on the new surface option here, you can see this is the shape I've got currently, right? So I've been manipulating it and I've been getting this. Now I want to reset this back to that initial sphere, so reset all the changes that I've made to the current primitive I'm projecting. Because if you get in here and you start changing these primitives, it's all like little slider values. So I'm just touching it and sliding it, and it's changing that shape drastically. So there's no real, unless I can remember all these numbers and all these values that are in there that I've been changing, I'm not gonna be able to get back to my original shape easily doing it manually. So what I can do is I can go to the Gear 3D option here, the Customize menu, and in here I can do Full Reset. And so what this is going to do, it's going to take that primitive and reset it, and now I'm going to get back to that sphere. So now I'm back to where I started with the sphere, but my shape is still the same. So at any time you want to reset that primitive that you're moving around and projecting into your surface, just go to the gear icon here, click Full Reset, and you'll get right back here. So let me look at these questions here. So Hannibal's asking about texturing. So that one, there's a bunch of things you can do in the materials. I'm not going to be able to go through it today, but basically there's a whole bunch of material things through here. Paul has been doing classes on rendering for his ZBrush ZClassroom Live stuff. He'll be going again on the 28th, so I think it goes before, yeah, the 28th he'll be going again. So definitely pop in there and ask him the questions about the materials, and he'll be able to kind of cover those, because there's a whole lot for materials. So if I go to the material palette here and open this up and just go to modifiers, you can see there's a bunch of different options here. You can also mix materials together. So some of these materials at the bottom here, like these things called tri-shaders, I don't know if you guys can see them. There's double shades, tri-shades, and quad shades, and these are all different materials, and it's basically taking a material and adding 4 of them together to give you a material. So the material process is just like extremely advanced, and there's a lot of technical stuff you can go in there. One thing you could do looking for, say, skin tones, is just do like a Google search for matte cap skin tones. And oftentimes people will go through and make their own materials. You can just download for free and then use in the software. And to load a material in, after you download it, you just go to material and do load, and that'll load that material in your scene, and then you can use it. So as for like the quickest way to go that route, I'd say probably just do a search for skin tone matte caps. And the keyword there is matte caps, which is material capture is what it stands for. And that's pretty much all these top spheres that ZBrush has in here. Web etching is asking, how do you accept the shape? So after you're happy with what the primitive deformer is doing, there's this little white cone, and this is just labeled accept. And so you just click and drag on that and it'll accept that shape. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut key for any of those processes, so you're gonna have to come through and use the cones for that. So Hannibal, for stripping out the metallic shader, you probably just want to use a double shader, and in the materials, you can copy the materials right here and paste. So if you want to rip one out, you can also just turn them off by just clicking this little icon here. So try doing that and see if that works. But if it is a matte cap, all the lighting will be based on an image that's loaded in the map itself. So if you have a metal material and it's looking like metal, more than likely the matte cap is driving that metal. So this image is what's giving you the metal. So in order to remove that metalness, you'd have to remove the image and basically just make a new matte cap. But yeah, I definitely hit up Paul for his streams, and he, as it looks like Randy said in his last stream, he went over the SSS and materials and how to create them. So I definitely hit up that. All right, so now I've reset my deformer and I have it as a sphere. And so I can see I can move this around. I can find out if I want some sort of cockpit or window shape here just by pressing this in. So sometimes this is good through here. And basically for the renders I'm kind of doing for the design here, I probably won't take it any farther than say this angle. So I usually end up doing car render stuff like this. So just finding the shapes that kind of work at that angle. Now with the sphere, what I want to do, instead of adding my cockpit there, I'm going to leave it alone for now, is I want to add some wheel wells. And for this, I'm going to take my sphere shape and I want to push it out and then push it back to those edges of the wheels there. And as you can see, as I drag this up and down, it's going to get a point where it's going to create this nice rounded area, right? So I can pull this in and out, and it's going to give me this flared edge. And I really like this shape. So you see, like a lot of the stuff I'll do for, you know, mimicking these vehicle stuff is I'll come through and use this and get those nice curves, right? And so all I'm doing is taking that initial sphere and I've just moved it off the symmetrical point and I'm running along the edge, and this is now projecting that sphere and giving me this kind of wheel well type shape. So you can see as I come through, I can manipulate this around and get front and back kind of designs here. Now with this, I want it to happen on both sides. So I want to locate these set of cones in this one corner here. And these have symmetrical options. And to enable, say, X symmetry, which my car is going down this way, I can come over here and click and drag, and that's going to turn it on. And now when I deform one side here, you're going to see that other side's going to deform as well. So I'm still manipulating one primitive, but now I'm getting it in a symmetrical fashion, and it's getting copied over on the other side. Now, one thing when you're doing this sphere process here and you're manipulating the shape, you can see how this is getting a little crazy right through here, right? So this is fine if you just want to use it for rendering, right? So the projection primitive can come through and it can really make a mess of your model, because it's going to, if you hit a thin surface, it will push and pull the surface, and it's going to take those back faces as it's trying to project the one, and it's going to project the back faces through. So as you can see here, I'm getting this kind of double effect here. And if I go to the tool palette and go down to the display properties and turn on double, you can kind of see a little better what's happening here, right? So that sphere is getting projected and it's pushing the back faces and the front faces together. Now this can give you some really cool kind of happy accident stuff. Like, I mean, that you get some crazy kind of star patterns through here. And I'll show you another way to do that a little bit later that I like to do. But basically you just want to be careful when you're doing this so you're not making a messy mesh. If you're just rendering, you're going to be fine, but if you want to use the booleans on this object afterwards, make sure you don't have any of this interpenetrating geometry, because that boolean system is going to look at that and it's going to go, oh, I can't process that, and then it's going to not be able to do it. So just be careful when you're using the spheres here to push in these wheel wells. Now you can apply some the changes to these two to kind of clean this up a little bit, and so the displacement one and the opacity will allow you to kind of change this as well, and this will give that wheel well a little bit thickness and prevent that area from interpenetrating itself. And so you can change these two, and that will help out that deformation as well. So just play with those and just try to get it to not make, you know, super crazy geometry in those areas. So now you can see I got this kind of effect happening where I have this kind of double wheel well through there, and that's going to be a pretty cool kind of silhouette design there. And then if I like that there, let me just change it a little bit to see what it gives me there, and click that white circle or the white cone to accept. And then I can move this to, say, the front part here and see what it's giving me up there. So that's giving me a pretty cool swoop too, like that little line right there. And this is all happy accident modeling, right? So I'm just coming through and just using this, and then if I see something I like, I'm going to keep it. If not, I can change it. You can also play with these white circles here and apply the clipping. So sometimes this is pretty cool to come through and, say, clip different areas. So if I only want that wheel well to come up halfway, just use that white circle, and now I've got something like this happening. So you can kind of come through and mess with this a little bit more too, and just play with these and see what kind of results it gives you. If you want a flat fender on the front there. So that looks pretty good there. Now I may want to add a little more tessellation to here too, so I'm going to find that tessellation cone, which is right over here, and click and drag and just add a little more tessellation there. You'll see it's going to add some topology and clean that area up, so now it's a little bit cleaner. Then I'm going to hit accept to that, so that's pretty good there. Let's see, look at these questions here. Pixelon is asking, so this is a off-topic tangent one here. He's got a morph target and he's doing some details with the chisel tool, but it's not working with the morph target to avoid the pinch. So you want to make sure that your objects, so the chisel brushes are a set of brushes that live inside a ZBrush up here. And these allow you to carve into the surface of your model, and they're using a vector displacement mesh process. So it carves in the surface and gives you a channel. When you use these, if you enable a morph target, what this allows you to do is allows you to draw a shape, and every time, usually when you use a sculptural brush inside a ZBrush, it's going to reanalyze the surface as you sculpt. So you sculpt once, ZBrush is going to now, when you sculpt again, it's going to analyze that surface and go, okay, this is now a trench. When you sculpt over top of it, it's going to sculpt to that trench again, right? So it's looking at the mesh every single time you create a stroke. If you store a morph target and you use, say, a chisel brush, it's going to remember the shape initially that object was at before you did any of those strokes. So if you have a sphere and you store a morph target, and now you use the chisel brush, it's going to carve in, but then if you carve in again, it's going to remember the normals from that initial sphere, and then it's going to give you the same depth. So you can kind of get this effect where you can carve over top and get this consistent result. So Pixelon is asking on that, how can you get that to work? So basically you just want to make sure that your model's positioned with the morph targets in the same state. And so when you use that chisel brush, you're not moving the mesh drastically to change that shape. So it's gonna, remember, it's looking at your initial morph target shape when you use that brush. If you're still having issues with that at any time, and also for everyone else out there, if you come to the help menu up at the top, there are some links, and then one of these links here is the Pixologic support, and so you can submit a ticket, especially if you think you ran into a bug or something like that inside of ZBrush, and that will take you right to the support site, and you can fill out a ticket, and we'll be able to help you there. So one thing there. Also in the help section, there's also ZClassroom, and so if you have any questions on anything like that too, or not ZClassroom, ZBrush Central, you can make a post on ZBrush Central, and the community will often come in and answer questions as well. So web etching is asking about how did I copy the shape and move it to another place. So I just accepted it. So with this one here, say I want, this one is good and I want to move it to another spot. I just took that shape and I clicked the accept button, which duplicated it basically, and then I can move it to somewhere else. So all I did was lock it in using the accept. So you can see now I have both those things there, and this shape is now its own. Roy is asking how to extend the XYZ axis line. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. And yes, you can rewatch all these streams. Thank you, Randy. They'll all be on YouTube, and you can replay them there. Web etching is asking, can we bring in our own shapes? So you cannot. So you are restricted to use this projection deformer based on those shapes, and that's one of the, so while I was covering, say, the new surface ones, that's why there's all these transformation ways where you can take your primitive and turn it into something else. So as you came up here and used these different modifiers, this will allow you to change that shape and adjust that form. If it starts getting really heavy or kind of slow when you're using it, make sure your tessellation isn't cranked up, because that has the ability to generate a really dense model as your projection primitive. So it's nice for keeping shapes and forms, but sometimes it can be a little bit overkill. So if you start noticing while you're using this, your mesh is getting a little bit slower, just make sure you don't have that tessellation cone cranked up really high. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add some quick wheels here, and I want to just add them as separate primitives. So I'm going to come up here to the primitive type and change this, and this is going to switch to a different primitive. So this one's pretty cool. This is just the ring here. And then I can come through and modify this. And you can see I have symmetry on, so now it's giving me some different kind of format here. And I may just killed ZBrush doing that. Let's see what happens. So if ZBrush ever goes down, it usually most of the time will end up quick saving, and we can usually get this back. So I'll show you how to do that. This is a helpful one. So if you ever do something and then something happens, you're going to get this little dialog that pops up that's just saying that, hey, there was an issue and something happened. But if we go back up to here, you can see in this quick save area here, we have some recovery files. So in here, it recovered my tool, so that one I was working on, right? So I can get that back. Now you'll notice with this one here, the recovery tool that it generated is a ZTL file. And what we've been doing recently, we've been using all these ZPR files. And so with the ZPR file, when you load that in, it's going to flood your entire canvas here with the right size. It's going to put you in edit mode, and you're going to be good to go. However, if you get a ZTL file, the process for this is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to show you a quick way to select this tool and then copy it, and then we'll get it back into a project. So first I'm going to load the file in here, so the ZTL that was recovered. You're going to see nothing happened this time when I clicked it. So I double clicked it and nothing loaded in. However, in the tool palette, you can see it's loaded over here, right? So there is my recovered tool, right? The one that quick saved when ZBrush went down. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click copy tool, and this is just going to store it in memory. Now what I want to do is I want to go over to the project area, and I just want to load in my initial sphere, right? So this is the one that we kind of started with initially, and since this is a .zpr file, it's going to set my background so that it fills my screen space. It's going to put me in edit mode, and I can start sculpting. So I'm going to double click this and load that project in. And now you'll notice when I loaded this in, my little car over here, my recovered file, disappeared. And that's just because the project file is going to come in and it's going to go, okay, let's bring you back to everything you had, so all your tools and everything. And a ZTL is only going to bring in a tool. So I could manually load that tool file back in, but since I stored it with this copy tool, I can now come over here and click paste tool, and that's now going to bring my recovered tool back. So now I have my recovered tool back, and it's in that project. So now I'm back to normal there. So that was a little quick one there, off tangent, to get my model back here. Now another thing with this, as I went down, I was creating these kind of rings here. Well, I don't really want the rings there, so now you can see I have these rings and this car. So I want to get rid of these rings really quick. So I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, which is going to give me the select rectangle brush, and then I'm going to click on the rings, which is going to isolate them, and then I'm going to click again while still holding Control and Shift, and this is now going to hide them. And now I just have my car here. And then in the geometry area, I want to open this up, and I want to go to Modify Topology, and I'm going to click Delete Hidden. And that's now going to get me back to where I was, so I've got my car and no more rings. Now this time, it's probably a good time to quick save, so I can click up here and quick that, and now that will be saving that file. So Plum is asking, what are you making, what car? So I'm just making a conceptual car. Whatever happens, it's the happy accident car, that's what we're gonna call it. So it's just using the projection primitive that's located in the Deformers, and we're just gonna go through and model those. I see Mr. Joe Mena, the famous Joe Mena, has logged in here. Hello, Joe. He's the other great Joe. So when you talk about Joseph and Joe, there's only really two of us. There's me and Mena, that's it. So there you go there. All right, so now I'm back to my car here, and we're gonna go back into the projection primitive. So coming up the top, I'm just going to move, scale, or rotate to get the gizmo 3D. And this can be worked on any model. So this right now, this car shape here inside of ZBrush is just a normal mesh. So I can go in and sculpt on it. So you can use the projection primitive with any mesh that's a polymesh 3D. So it doesn't have to be that starter shape. It can be what I have right here. It could be another mesh you already had. It doesn't matter. It just is a deformer, and it'll work with any polymesh 3D. So I'm gonna click the customize menu here and go back into the projection primitive. And so now we got greeted here again with our circle shape. So now we've changed our Saturn to be a little weirder looking, right? So I'm gonna take this up to the top here, just push it out of the surface of the car here. And then I'm gonna go over here and set new shape again so I can see the shape here. And I'm gonna change my primitive type back to that ring. So I wanted to get back to these tire type shapes here. And then I'm gonna modify this shape a little bit. So I'm gonna come up to these cones here and find the modifier one. And just kind of modify that, maybe modify this, give it a little bit of a, not as circular type property here. And you can just change these sliders here and get those different results. So I kind of like that form there, maybe bring it in a little bit. So something like that. Now at this stage, you have a few ways you can change how this is facing. So right now my car wheels, I want them to go this way, not vertically. This is a fun shape to play with though, in terms of new surface. So I set it back down to 0. You can merge it into your shape. And this will give you some cool stuff too, which is fun to play with. You get these little like triangular designs. But I want to make wheels first. So I'm going to move it back up here. And I'm going to turn on that new surface option to get my wheel back. And then with this, I'm going to change this little primitive axis one, which will toggle how this is going to be generated. I could also just rotate this with the Gizmo 3D, but it's a little bit quicker to just come through here and click and drag on this slider here, and this will change the axis of that primitive. So now I have it like this. Now I can position it down here and move it so it starts forming where I want this wheel at. Oftentimes when I'm doing this kind of stuff too, I don't know, I kind of experiment with tire kind of shapes too. So my cars usually, if you look at them straight on when I do this, they're not really that beautiful, but if I kind of view them from the side, I like the profiles. So I'm more focused on, say, this profile shape of my cars when I'm doing this instead of this. And this is just all just my madness here. So looking for happy accidents and going with it. So I want to activate that symmetry again because I want 2 of these. So I'm coming over here to this cone and turn that on. Now I have 2 of those. And now I can position this somewhere in here. I kind of like them up front, maybe something like that. I'm happy with that one, so I'm going to click accept. Well, let me just see what it looks like if it's lower. Maybe we may keep it lower. I may do it like that. I'm going to click accept, and that's now going to give me that as a copy, and now I can generate my back wheel. Now when you're doing this, you can see this little box is going to frame around your shape here. So you can use this to kind of your advantage to kind of line these up. You could also hold shift and lock it to an axis. So I'll move this one, say here. And then if I want this larger, I can definitely change it up, change the style. If I want multiple wheels. So you really just have endless possibilities with this. And I have no background in car design, so this is just me just making something. So I'm not You know, there's no design elements here that I follow and go, hey, yeah, those wheels would never work. So I'm not concerned about any of that. I'm just looking at the side profile here, finding things I might like, and then going with it. So there's no ways by any means am I a someone that knows how car design should work or the optimal structure. I'm just looking at shape. So I purposely went through, so we have a question purposely about the tires being round. So I purposely went through and added this little arc here because I want to play with it. But if you want them round, you just come back to this modifiers here and change it. And as you change these modifiers, move it, moved on me. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd my modifier go? There it is. You can change these and this will change the roundness. So if you want it round, just change that one modifier and it will definitely go back. If you want it flatter. So it's just all just changing that modifier there. And once again, when you do any of the processes in the deformer here, you're gonna get the polygroups and also the edges visible. If you don't want that to happen, just come over here to the polyframe tab and there's these two little buttons on top, line and fill. And if you turn these on or off, this is now gonna disable that from happening. So if I change the modifier now, you see it's not gonna shift to polyframes or polygrouping. So that's how you can disable that. So that tire is looking good there, so we're going to accept that. So we're going to come over to the white circle. Let me just move it quick so that snaps back there. Move it back just slightly. Click accept. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to get the cylinder primitive and I want to use it as a displacement object. So I'm going to go back to the customize menu here. I'm going to do a full reset to get back to that initial circle since I modified that initial shape there. I may want to make this cockpit here quick too. So I'm just taking that circle and then playing with this until I get something that kind of looks, you know, cockpity. That's a new word there for you guys too. We make them up as we go. And I'm just taking this primitive and then just inserting it in. And I'm just looking for some sort of edge that would kind of go through here. And once again, I'm not looking for, you know, super believability here. I'm just kind of trying to find where I want to go. So that's kind of interesting there. And then we'll scale this. So we're going for this profile too in my design here. That looks pretty good. I'm going to add a little tessellation to that. So I'm going to go to the tessellation cone right here and just tessellate it a little bit so it makes it a little bit harsh and then lock that in. And then I'm going to go reset this one more time because I was focused on the wheels and then got distracted. So this is what happens. And so now I have this. I now am going to take this and I want to turn it into a cube. So I'm going to click new surface so you guys can see this. So I go to the primitive type and change it to this cylinder shape like this. Actually, I'm going to do it as a ring. Let's try the ring. And I'm going to change my customize option here. If I can select it here and get it go like that. And now I'm going to move this. So I'm going to go back over here and I'm just going to position it. And where I want to position this, I want to position it right over the tire, like this, right? And I want this effect to happen in not the new primitive form or the new surface, but I want to happen in the projection. And as you can see, when I change that, I'm now projecting that cylinder into my tire. And this is giving this little kind of happy accident through here. And it's making my tires not look so, you know, boring, right? So now I've come down here and added this. That would not work as a tire, but we're going with it. And so this is kind of how I go with my processes here. And then I can rotate this. And I'm just looking at basically the design through here, right? I can add a cylinder in later if I want, but that's giving me some cool kind of tire shape. And I can just play, all I'm doing is moving this around and trying to find what I like on this. So I kind of like it at that slight angle like that. And then we're going to accept that. And now I'm going to do it to the front tire too. So just move this down here. Now this one I can kind of see where I want it to happen. Probably want it to be similar to the back. So maybe like that there. And one thing I didn't do, you'll notice I didn't put symmetry on before I did this. So I'm going to undo back to this shape here. So just take Control Z and got back to this one. And then in here I'm going to come over to the symmetry option and turn that on. So it's happening in the other tire too. And then I'm going to accept that and then move that again to the front tire. And then I'm just moving this, repositioning it until it gives me what kind of a design I like. So there we go. So now I got some tires there. I'm gonna accept that. Now let's move this again, and we're gonna see what else we can do to the rest of the car here. Oh, I didn't fully accept. So my thought here, someone's mentioning that it's gonna be a bumpy ride, is maybe the tire like cuts through, right? So you have like this shell that wraps around the tire, and the tire's on the inside of it, right? So could be like a framework that covers the tire, and then the tire is actually another cylinder inside. That's what I'm kind of thinking with the kind of design here right now. So it could also be a hover car. Endless possibilities, endless. So I'm gonna click accept to that. So I got those locked in. And I'm gonna experiment with this in the body area here because I want to see if I can get a little more kind of design elements through here, because it's looking a little bit flat in that area there. And I know I want to take this, I'm going to render this, and so I want to add a little bit more light catching things here. And this is where you can see you can start getting even more happy accidents. Now, some of these shapes, as we talked earlier, may not be good for using with, say, boolean operations, which I want to go in and add as well. So just be careful when you're going chaotic like this. If you're going to do all your renderings, and you can definitely keep it like the way it is. But if you're going to, say, try to like print it or do any other kind of processes like using the live boolean, you're not going to want that to happen. Because right now this is giving me some crazy geometry through here, but I like it. So I may keep it right now for this, and then just may see if I can adjust the tessellation or the displacement values here, just kind of clean it up a little bit. But that's giving me a little bit of design there I like, and then we're gonna accept that. We're going with it. So I'm gonna come in here and do a full reset. And we're going to move it over. And this is just another sphere primitive here. And I'm actually changed this to a cylinder again. So I'm going to click new shape. Oh, wrong button. Just so you guys can see this quick. So new surface. If I can select it. And then we're going to change the primitive type here. We're going to go to this one, and then we get out a new surface, and then I'm going to now use this to modify. And if you see, if I come across those tires there, this is projecting into those tires, and I can take this even further where I'm getting like flat elements to parts. And this is all just happy accident mode right now. It's just going through and I'm just moving it and seeing what it does, right? Seeing if there's something I like, something I don't like. If you pull this out from that surface, it'll actually come through and add, or you pull it into the surface. This can give you some really cool, crazy shapes too. It gives these nice kind of, this shape, which I like. And this is just taking it and it's using this cone, and as you can see, it's giving you this lip shape. So I'll show you some images later where I've used this quite a bit, where I've just taken a shape and then I've pressed it into the surface, and now it gives me this kind of bar shape. If I turn on double, you can kind of see this a little bit better. And this gives this weird, cool like shelf, right? So I have these straight sides and then just kind of like this bubbles shelf that's through the middle. And so for like wheel wells and stuff like that too, especially on tires, like any of these circular elements, it gives some cool like hover effects. So if I wanted to make some sort of hover car, right? I've now taken that wheel and now generated this, and then I can just keep playing with this until it gives me more craziness. So now I could say add jets. And then you got to make sound effects too. Always make sound effects. All right, so we're good with the wheels there. I want to add some sort of surface through here to break up this roof. And what I'm looking at right now is I'm looking up at what the objects contain surface-wise and how I can break them up to get different lighting systems based on them or different control out of it. So my body right now, if I pull this up, and then I'm just going to turn on my polyframes here and turn on fill, you can see I have these polygroups, right? So every time I added one of these shapes, I got this polygroup area that I can then use to break up the model. And right now I know if I render this, if I render it in one material, I've got some nice stuff going through here, but this area right through here doesn't really have any things, right? So it doesn't really have any design elements or anything that's like eye-catching. So the wheels are very eye-catching, the swoop that's coming through. This stuff down here is looking good, but where this kind of cockpit would be, or say like driver's side window would be, I don't really have any breakup. So I was kind of looking through and trying to see if I could find some sort of element that I could add to that to flush it out. So this is not giving me what I want here. I can maybe see what it's going to do on the back. But basically, I'm not getting what I want with that happy accident. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You just need to go through and play with it. If you want jet turbines, you can add those too. Maybe it's a jet car. But you see some of these are just a little bit too much. This is why I said it's often happy accident mode when I use these. You could have some weird back seat kind of things, right? So this could have the, if you need passengers, they go in the back here, right? And they just sit in these open spots. So we can do that, we can turn symmetry on. We might keep that effect. And then I want to generate these so they're not clipping each other, because I don't want to make too much of a mess. This could also be where the engine goes. You never know, you never know. And then we'll add a little more tessellation to that. So that looks good there, and I'm going to accept that. And then we're going to do is take that part and see what I can get, if I can get anything out of the front. And then we're going to be done with the projection primitive here, and we're going to go on some other stuff. We start setting up some objects for boolean. So I got these weird front air dams through here maybe. Scale those up. And for this car too, you guys can see that my initial front shape isn't really that exciting. The profile is what I'm going for here. So, and this is all just based on, I knew going into this, my plan was to generate just a car design, and I didn't want it to, I know which angle I want, so I wanted this angle. All right, so we're gonna keep that. So we're gonna finish this out. So after I'm done using the projection primitive, I've got a shape I like. I'm gonna come over here to the gear icon and hit accept, and that's gonna bring me back to the normal Gizmo 3D. And I'm gonna quick save this to make sure we're good there. And now at this stage, if I wanted to fix this profile too, you can definitely do that. And the easiest way to do that is use just the deformer. So I come in here and grab that, and then I can hold down Control and Alt at the same time, which will give me a selection. So I see these points on that deformer there, and I can actually manipulate this too. So if I wanted to change, say, the overall taper on that object, I can do that as well. This, of course, would be giving you some weird driving aspect, because you're going to get your wheels are going into the same direction of impending doom. But you can kind of use that too at the very end to kind of flush out that front there. And then if you're happy with that, just click accept. So now that I've got my kind of car design here, the next thing I want to do is I want to kind of look at these surfaces here, and I want to clean them up a little bit. So for the main body, I want to go in and I want to add some Boolean details. So this is just going to add a little more light catching elements, break up the mesh a little bit more. I could come in and add some scribe lines. I could do some things like that just to give it a little more design factor. Before I do that, I want to separate these tires out to their own subtools so I don't mess those up. I'm pretty happy with the tires here. I could add another primitive, which I may do here in a second, another ring shape to kind of bring out another element, but I'll do that with just a normal subtool. So I'm gonna come to the tool palette here and go to the subtool area, and I wanna split this into parts. So I'm gonna turn on my polyframes, and I just have fill turned on, I have line turned off. So you can see this is broken up into different polygroups. So I first want to come through and just isolate these into geometry islands. So every time I was using the projection primitive, you could see it was giving me a different polygroup breakup. Now you may want to keep these because you can then split your model off into these and then send them to, say, Keyshot with these different parts and then apply different materials, and it'll give you a different breakup. So sometimes you may want to keep the polygroups that were generated. For this, I really just want the tires coming out. So I could do it the slow way, just selecting one part of the tire. So this was just holding Control and Shift and clicking. And then after I have one selected, if I hold Control, Shift, and A, it'll give me that whole geometry island. So there's one part there. And then I can go to the Tool, Subtool, Split area and do a Split Hidden. And so now just split the back tires out. Then I can go back to the other tool there hold down Control and Shift, click one of the parts of that wheel, hold Control Shift and A, which should give me, I had a connection point, so that is not going to work there. Oh, there we go. And now I'll have just those front wheels. So Control Shift A, if you have visibility, it's going to look at all the connecting vertices and show you everything that's connected to the part you isolated. So I isolated that poly group, Control Shift A, and it showed everything. Now I'm going to go to Tool, Geometry, Subtool, and Split Hidden again. And now I have this broken up into 3 parts. So I have my back wheels, my front wheels, and my car body. Okay. So I'm going to add those little cylinders there for those wheels quick, because that's pretty fast. So I'm going to select one of these here. I'm going to click Append, and then I'm just going to append in a Ring 3D object. Now I could go into this primitive and modify it to get it to be a little bit slender, move it around, but for this shape, I'm just going to go through and wing it. So we're just going to grab the Ring 3D primitive and load it in. It's going to come in as a new subtool over here. So I come over and click it. And now with this, I can use the deformer or the gizmo 3D. So switching to move, scale, or rotate, scale this up, and then I can move it out. And so I was talking about before, let's see if I can get this tire to have this inner wheel inside of it. All right, let's see if I can get this to go. So having this little kind of aspect in here, it's kind of giving a little more kind of design element here. So now I have this inner thing that's inside that other one. So I have a tire inside a tire, right? I can adjust the deflation on this by going to Deformer here and changing the inflate option, which will make this a little bit skinnier of a tire here. And I can scale this up. And you can see you can play with this quite a bit too. So I can kind of get this to fit in here, maybe drop it down, and maybe just have it so you can see just a little bit of it hanging out of the bottom. So let's say this was like a hubcap around the wheel, and this is the part that actually would touch the road. So it's spinning inside this thing. So now I have that. Just scale it up a little bit more. Come on, scale. There we go. And of course, this is a razor blade. Now this is going to be just rendered from the side here, so I don't need to have it too crazy. And then I want to duplicate this, so I'm going to hold down Control, and this is just with the Gizmo 3D selected and move, scale, or rotate. If you hold down Control, it's going to duplicate the geometry of what you have unselected on the selected subtool. So holding down Control and clicking is now going to duplicate that ring. I can now move it up to the front, and then I can reposition that so it's in the front one. So now I have this front one and this back one here. And I just want to make sure it's visible on the front one here, and I don't want it jutting out of that front part, but I want to see a little bit there and a little bit out of that side. So just positioning like that. Then I'm going to clear my mask with Control, and now I'm going to go down here to the geometry area and go to Modify Topology, and I want to mirror and weld in the X, and so it's going to take this part and flip it to the other side, so now I have tires on both sides. So mirror and weld, and now I have it on both there. And then that looks pretty good. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to just quick save quick to make sure that locks it in. And let me check these questions quick. So Chris is asking, when I change to a different shape, my car disappears. So with this, what you want to make sure is if you have, say, this, I just have my body and my car selected here. And I go into Move, Scale, Rotate, the Gizmo 3D. If I come in here and click Customize, if you click on any of these, I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, but if you click on these, it's going to replace what you have right now. So if I click on any of these, my car is now going to turn into a cylinder, okay? So that's one thing there that could be perhaps happening. So if you went to the Deformer menu here and you clicked on a primitive, it's going to replace the one you have selected. So that's just what's going to happen there. This will also happen if you have an insert mesh brush and you load it. So if I come through here and say get the IMM boolean brush, where are you, boolean brush? Or the model kit brush. And this will now load this in. Now if I have draw selected up at the top, move my keyboard down here, and I click on these, you can see nothing's going to happen. If I have move, scale, or rotate selected and I click on one of these, it's going to replace. Okay, so that could be what's happening. It could be the deformer option, Chris, that you're using, and it's changing your shape. So you just want to make sure that you have an object. If you're going to use one of these in here, just create a dummy object first, and then it'll come through and grab this. But the process I've been using with the deformers is you just select your object and then immediately come over here and activate the projection primitive and then that should keep the model there and give you a deformer that you can actually move with it. So web etching was asking how you make holes in the shape. So to make holes when you're using the projection primitive, if it's out of the surface, if the middle point of the primitive you're projecting is out of the mesh surface, it's going to push in. If that middle point goes into the mesh surface, it's going to push out. So that's how you can kind of go through. You won't be able to make holes that go all the way through the object with the projection primitive, because what it's doing is just projecting the surface of that one mesh to the primitive you're adding to it. So there's no way to really punch a hole. It may give you the effect that it looks like it's punched a hole through your shape, but it's actually probably just taken that back face geometry and put it somewhere else. So it's not really doing any cuts. So you'd have to use the boolean system for that. Fixie is saying I should totally have wheels coming out of the bottom like the Flintstones. I totally should. So Pablo's asking, I just entered the stream, are you using any reference? So no. This is Happy Accident Day. This is just me modeling randomness. And so today we're using the projection primitive and I'm just modeling a car. So I started with this lump of stuff and then I've just used this deformer to find shapes I liked, and then I'm just going along with it. So Brian's also asking, how do you create a dynamesh shell? So we will not be covering that one today, but for the creation of the dynamesh shell, basically you need to have an object. If you do a Ask ZBrush search for how to hollow out a model, so if you just go to say YouTube and do a search for Ask ZBrush hollowing a model, there's a bunch of videos on that process. And there's one that will go through the process of using the dynamesh shell. There's also a plugin you can download from the Pixologic Resource Center that is called Dynamesh Master, and that has an automation process built into it for using the dynamesh shell feature. And so that will allow you to come through and just click that. You can set a millimeter value actually in there, and then it'll run that dynamesh process and give you a shell back. And then the boolean system will also allow you to shell geometry as well. All right, so for my car here, I want to come through and I want to add some boolean process. So I want to subtract some elements from this. Now I'm going to send my model to Keyshot during this process, and so I need to have the boolean processes converted to geometry to go to Keyshot. Now the live boolean will run pretty much anything inside of ZBrush, so if I subtract parts out, my model could be extremely messy and I'll still get a nice preview at it. And then with that preview inside of ZBrush, I can render with BPR, I could use the filters, I could do whatever I wanted. But if I want to get my car to Keyshot and I was using Boolean parts, I have to have those Boolean parts baked into the model, and then I can send that to Keyshot. So Keyshot won't let me use a live Boolean preview inside of it. And so for this car here, I want to use some Boolean processes, but I first need to clean up my topology, because with the project primitive here, I have some areas that are looking a little bit crazy. And so areas like this through here, I have some geometry that's kind of hugging into each other, maybe really thin and floating on top. So for this, what I want to do is I just want to clean this up a little bit. Now, one way you can kind of clean this up is to run zremesher, and sometimes this will work really well. You can also run dynamesh, and this will also work really well. Sometimes when you do this, it may not be too happy, especially if you were doing some craziness with those project primitives and you've got a lot of topology that's crossing over each other, going through each other. The dynamesh process is trying to create a solid object and then close everything. So in some of those areas, it may not work. So I'm just giving you a caveat here before I try to do this process and it fails. So with this, what I want to do is I just want to come through and I want to just dynamesh it, right? So I'm going to save my tool here and we're going to try the dynamesh process for here. So I'm going to come down to the dynamesh area and open this up. And in here, I just want to start at a low resolution dynamesh just to test it, right? So the project primitive is going to go through and I got some cool stuff, but it may be too cool to actually convert. So I'm gonna come over here and click dynamesh. And you can see, okay, that worked. So we're good there. So now I can undo that. Now I'm just gonna increase this gradually. So we're gonna say 512 in dynamesh and see what that gives me. So this is actually looking pretty good. So we're gonna be able to get those designs out of it. Now you can see through here when I dynameshed, since those areas were really thin, I'm starting to get holes, right? So those surfaces are like this. Dynamesh is coming through and establishing new topology across everything. That surface is like paper thin, so I'm starting to get these holes through here. Now the live Boolean system isn't gonna like those holes. So there's some ways you can fix this. The first way is we come down here to the deformation area and I can just apply an inflate. And this is gonna inflate that topology out. Now when you do this, you may also get some happy accidents too. So you can see as this came out, now I'm getting these kind of things happening, right? So I told you today is gonna be all happy accidents. Like that's looking pretty interesting right there. I have this kind of like win design in that corner there. And then I have kind of this rough edge now down here. So I can inflate a little bit and then just run the dynamesh process again. And let's see if that gets rid of that Swiss cheese that was happening. So run that quick, let's see what I get. So that's looking better. I now have a little, it's kind of distortion, basically where it was trying to get that dynamesh, but it's cleaned up that area there. So what this means is I can run this probably a little bit higher. So I'm gonna run it at say 1024. I'm gonna turn off blur this time. And well, hopefully this will process. So there we go, that's looking pretty good. So now I have my model as a dynamesh. Now I can double check this too, because if you're using the projection primitive, you may have some holes or some inner surfaces. So I'm just gonna hold Control and Shift and just double click. Just check to make sure that my surface is solid. Because oftentimes if you're using this as well, let me turn off display properties too. I just wanna make sure that I have no inner kind of geometry there. So the project primitive deformer, when you do it, or the projection primitive deformer, when you project, you can get those cross geometry. And then if that happens, you may end up with an inner surface. So if I went to and tried to use the boolean and try to carve in that surface, it's gonna make a hole, or it's gonna go, you know, back face, front face, and then it's gonna get, make crazy time. So we don't want that. So I just dynameshed the model. I'm gonna turn off dynamesh now. So now I have this ready to go for some boolean processes. So I'm gonna turn on my polyframes here. You can see I still have polygroups here too. At this stage, you could also use something like panel loops, which is pretty cool. And panel loops is gonna look at all the polygroup breakup and allow you to get some scribe lines or some panel lines on this quick. So if I can come through here to the geometry area, and then we can go to the edge loop area here, we can do a quick edge loop process here, or even like the panel loops or group loops. And if you run panel loops by default, it's gonna look at all those polygroup breakups, and sometimes this gives you some nice stuff too. So we're just gonna try that quick and see what it does. So this is what those panel loops gave me, right? So some of these, I had a bunch of polygroups that were going crazy, so it didn't give me the most smooth thing there, but this is just kind of give you an example of what you can kind of get out of it if you have polygroups. Now I could go in and clean up these polygroups, I could smooth these polygroups out. All these things would make them a lot more visible on my design, and then I could use them more effectively. But that's another way if you want kind of edge lining on your models, just use the panel loops. You have a bunch of sliders over here. Paul loves panel loops. So if you're in one of his streams, I'm sure he'd be happy to go into panel loops more in depth. Questions here quick? Pro saying waiting for doing complex arch roofs. If you have an image of what you're looking for, Pro, is this related to the cathedral ceiling? I may have something coming for you on the cathedral ceiling in the next few days. If it is, hold your breath, it's coming. Cone with the deformer, try using the square primitive. I think if you change those cones in there, you might be able to get a cone deformer. Saeed, try that. So Randy's asking, would union by remesh work instead of dynamesh? So the union deformer is basically the same thing as using the live Boolean system, right? So if your model has that cross geometry or has any areas that are giving these non-cone planar surfaces, you're not gonna be able to use that. So that's one thing there, like when using this project primitive deformer, you can try it, but oftentimes if you have taken stuff crazy with the project primitive, those pieces of geometry are going over top of each other and making a mess. And so if you try to use the live Boolean, it's already gonna tell you no, okay? So that's why I went through and dynameshed it to kind of clean those up. And so now when I use the live Boolean, it's gonna go, yay, let's go with it. So the remesh by union that's in the deformer is using the live Boolean system. So if it's going to, definitely try it. I mean, it doesn't hurt. But if your geometry's got all sorts of coplanar stuff happening, it's not gonna work. All right, so now I want to add a little more detail here, and then we're going to throw this into Keyshot. So with this, I'm just going to add a dummy subtool. So I'm going to go to the subtool menu. I'm going to click append and then add in just the polymesh 3D star. I'm going to take this, make sure I turn on my tools again. I'm going to rotate it just to the side here, just because, and I'm going to make it small. I'm just going to float it off in space. Now I'm going to activate draw. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to turn that star subtool to a subtractive subtool. And we covered this with the live Boolean demonstration we did for ZClassroom Live 2 on how to use the live Boolean system. I've also activated live Boolean, and now I'm going to come up here in the brush palette and I want to locate the IMM Boolean brush. And so this one's set up for this Boolean process. And now with this, I'm going to come through and I'm just going to use this to add some more detail to my design here. So we talked about earlier that I wanted some sort of edging through here. So I can do this with just this live Boolean. So I can say grab, say, this insert mesh, and then I can drag this out on my model and I can start getting that shape, right? So now I have an area on that mesh using the Boolean that's now adding that eye-catching result. And I can use this anywhere on my model, so just taking these insert meshes and just playing with them, right? So once again, this is happy accident mode. We're taking some of these and we're seeing what it gives us. If we don't like it, we can hit Control-Z and it's gonna go away. So I can come through and play with this. Maybe like that's giving me a pretty cool shape there, right? So I got this kind of under cage area there, some little more detail. I can make that a little bit flatter, or I can pull it up just some. And all I'm doing is clicking and dragging to add these. And the process I'm doing is I'm using this as insert meshes. So this is what I'm adding. And then these insert meshes, since the subtool setup is subtractive, it's automatically cutting into the mesh. So you can see I'm getting this result. So I'm just gonna come through and play with some of these to kind of see if I can get different things happening that I like, creating some visual kind of designs here. So I still want to separate this windshield a little bit more. So I'm just gonna play with a few of these and see if I can get some elements there. This one's a fun one to say add little bits of detail. And once again, this is just all happy accident. So I'm just coming through. I know I want something in certain areas, like design-wise, but I have no real kind of idea other than what I'm doing just to see what it looks like and then going from there. So that little design there could be a few places, maybe up here as well. And I'm just drawing these out and then it's just appearing. And oftentimes when I do this too, I try to repeat shapes, because if you think of something like in design or even manufactured, there'll be one part, and then in order to mass produce it, you probably have it, 5 or 6 times, right? So if you have a bolt in one spot on a vehicle or a car, more than likely you're gonna have that somewhere else. Like, you're never gonna be restricted to just one object in one area. It's always gonna be kind of multiples, because they're not just gonna make one bolt. Sometimes they do, but most of the times they're not gonna make one bolt and use it one time. So you can come through and use that to your advantage and just generate stuff. And you can see I'm just carving into the surface here with the Booleans. If I don't like it, it goes away. I'm just experimenting with stuff. This car's probably not going to have some sort of door. We don't need no doors. And this is where I go into happy sculpt mode too. If you're using this as well and you drag something out and you want to keep it a consistent shape, so if I drag this out and hold Control, it's going to lock into the size of my draw size slider up here. So I can change this down to a smaller one and hold Control, and then wherever I put this, it's going to be at that same size. So this helps too when creating different little design elements too. I'm going to add some of those there. That's a little too much. But I basically would go through and play with this quite a bit. So for the essence of time here, I want to add maybe some positive shapes too. I would probably go through and flush this out quite a bit with these different design elements, because right now there's a lot of areas that I kind of want to see, more shapes brought into, like stuff like this, where, I've got little flat surfaces on things, but I could play with this for another, hour here, and until I finally got what I wanted. But you can see you can get cool stuff just taking these Boolean options and then just processing them, right? So now I got some sort of blade there. If I want to expose that other wheel, I can start doing that. I can move these around too, so I have those wheels here. So if I don't want the wheels to cut, I can just put them below the subtractive tool, and now when I cut in, I'll expose that wheel. So this is another fun way to get different design stuff happening. So if I wanted that more open kind of design through there, I could definitely do that. So we're going to keep this probably like this, so I can get maybe some element in here. Because this little roof line here is going to be all one single shape, and I don't know if I like that. All right, we're going to go with it for now. Okay. So let's look at these questions quick. We're going to save this out, and then we're going to do some quick stuff here inside of Keyshot using the bridge. So Randy's asking about the noise pattern stuff. I always like showing it, but I think I'm gonna have to wait because I've got to go power to Keyshot, and there's some things I want to show in there. I'm gonna run out of time if I go into that tangent. But let's see, what's the next one I'm doing? I forget what the next one I'm doing is, but if it's, I think the next one's 3D printing. The one after that, I may be able to do, I'll see if I can do building stuff, and then I'll show you the that process, Randy, on how to use that noise stuff, because it's really cool, but it is definitely a tangent. We get a question, why is the wheel skinny? Because it is. It's like a metal blade. It's a cutter. It's a cutter wheel. So this is just me messing with elements inside of ZBrush. I just found shapes I liked and then started going with it. So there's no design element here. It's just I liked it and I went with it. For the wheel being skinny, I liked it because I don't really see it. So it could definitely be thicker inside the shell. So I just needed it to stick out of these edges, right? So I didn't need it to go, you know, correctly. I'm just looking for that design or that shape just to get it popped out. All right, so now I'm going to send this over to Keyshot using the bridge. And so if you guys have, or guys and gals have the trial downloaded for ZBrush here, you can also download the trial for the bridge, and then you can also download the trial for Keyshot, and you can use all these things together. So right now I just have these files set up like this. So these are separate tools here for the tires and then the body, and then I have those little Boolean objects and the wheels. So right now these Boolean objects are not getting cut in. So if I turn off live Boolean, this is what I'd get if I sent it to Keyshot. So I need to process the Boolean first. So I'm going to take my car here. I'm going to turn off everything except for the car and the Boolean element. Then I'm going to come down here to the Boolean area, and I'm going to click Make Boolean Mesh. And I want to make sure I have dynamic subdivision on too. So let me just apply that quick. That'll soften those shapes up. And then I'm going to activate the dynamic subdivision mode, and I'm going to click Make Boolean Mesh. And now we hope that my model is clean. And so this is why I dynameshed, so hopefully this will process. And so it did. And so the Boolean system inside ZBrush is really, really robust. I mean, it's very rare that I have something fail, but you can get to fail, especially if you have a lot of coplanar surfaces and stuff that's interpenetrating. But you see, this is the result I have now, and this is geometry, right? So this is no longer, you know, the Boolean process happening. It's my car shape, and those Boolean processes are cut in. So I'm gonna go back to my original tool here, and I'm gonna append that result in. So this is going Tool, Subtool, and then clicking Append. I'm gonna grab the UMesh version there, and then I'm gonna turn off the one that wasn't the one I had, and I'm just gonna name this. We're gonna name this Original. And then we're going to name this Boolean. I'll make sure I hit enter there. And then we're gonna name these Tire. And then we'll name this Rear. And this is just gonna help me know what these are once I get them to Keyshot. Okay, and I'm gonna turn the eyeball icons on for everything I wanna send. So I don't wanna send the ones I was processing with the Boolean, so I'm just gonna leave those off. And then with this, I'm gonna position my car just for an angle, right? So I'm gonna use the angle here inside of ZBrush. I'm gonna turn that floor on so I can kind of see it. And if you have perspective on and you send a model to Keyshot, it's gonna bring in the camera. So this should match up inside of Keyshot here. If you have perspective turned off, it's just gonna send the model. So this is helpful when you wanna, say, resend something. So now I'm going to come across and I'm going to go to the Render tab. I'm gonna go to External Render, and I'm gonna activate Keyshot. Now that's all you have to do in terms of that stage. So now that I have my model, it's ready to go. I've activated Keyshot. I'm gonna quick save one last time here. Now I'm going to click BPR, and instead of rendering in BPR, it's gonna send my model to Keyshot. And this is gonna launch at the same time. So a question about the bottle. So this is a swell bottle, is what it is. And this one's had some battle damage, but it is a ZBrush swell bottle. Paul makes fun of me because it tells you in the instructions never to put this in the dishwasher. And so he will go on and on about how I have ruined my swell bottle by putting it in the dishwasher, which I probably have, but it still works and I can still drink out of it, and it holds water. So that is what that is there. All right, so this is what I get in Keyshot after sending. Now, one thing with Keyshot is also going to use your CPU cores. So in here at the top, if you switch your environment from default or from startup to default, you're going to get this little slider here, and this is going to allow you to change your CPU usage. If you wanted Keyshot to render at 100% CPU, just change this to 100%. For this demo here, since I'm running OBS and also ZBrush is open, I'm going to keep this pretty low, so my rendering process in here is not going to be extremely fast. So just one thing there to take note of as I use this. Next thing, it's going to bring over your scene based on the size of your canvas inside of ZBrush. So you can see this is now bringing it into that correct size, but I want it to go to the edges. So I'm going to go to the render image tab up here, go resolution presets, and just change this quick to something a little bit bigger, so maybe 1920 by 1080. If you get out of full screen with Keyshot 2, it should resize to that thing there if you turn off the lock aspect and lock resolution. So one thing there, we'll be able to go full screen too. Now, once I bring my model in, there's a few things that I do just right out the gate. The first one is I usually come over to the environment area over here, and I'm going to go to environments, and I want to find something with high contrast. There is usually a forest road HDRI that was with like Keyshot 5 that I use all the time. For this one, I'm just going to grab something with a lot of high contrast in it. So say something like this road here, and I just want to drag it in here, and that's just going to apply it as my background scene. So now I have my ZBrush model and then Keyshot in the background. I can now rotate the scene by holding down Control and dragging, and this is going to allow me to rotate this. And I want to find that light source. So the light source was coming from over there. So I kind of want this on the edge of the mesh so as to get a rim light. And one thing that I do with a lot of rendering is I like that kind of profile light edge. And so everything I'll render, I'll try to get that. Next thing I want to do is I want to go to the environment tab here, and I want to change my background color and turn off ground shadows. So you can turn off this. This is going to speed up your processing a little bit. And then I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to change my color from white to say black. And so now I have my model looking like this. The next thing I want to do is I want to apply one global material to everything. So I'm going to go to the scene tab up here, and in the model sets I have ZBrush, and if you open this up, these are all my subtools that I brought in, right? So since I had those ones hidden, it didn't bring those in, but you can see I got everything else. And then I go over to the material palette over here, and in here you can they have some really good ones in this paint option here, and these are actually pretty cool, and they look pretty good on your mesh. Another thing I recommend doing is going to the downloads for Keyshot. So if you go to the, let me see if I can figure it up here, cloud library up here in window, and this will open up a little library, and there's a whole bunch of different materials there. Some really good ones are ones done by Nacho. He's another ZBrush artist that does a lot of rings and jewelry, and his materials are pretty awesome. So he does like a lot of blended materials for like bronze and metal, and they give a good result when you put them on your models. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and just apply it globally to everything. So I'm going to take his oxidized silver here. I'm going to drag it all the way over here to the ZBrush one. If I drag it on the model at this stage, it's only going to apply it to one part of the model. And I wanted to apply to everything just out the gate, just see what it looks like. So I'm going to come over here and apply it to that. And that's now going to apply to everything. And now I have my car looking like this. Now Keyshot uses CPU, and it does this rendering here in preview in real time. So the longer you let your model sit without changing the view, the clearer it's going to get. So this is now processing, and it's going to keep processing until I stop it. And so as this happens, of course in the stream I'm going to be modifying it, so you're never going to get like a really clean result until you let it sit or do a render process inside of Keyshot. So if I want those reflections to come back in, I can turn on those, and these are just going to come in and I can see the bottom of my car. If you don't want those reflections to be so strong, you can definitely change your background environment some. And this is just changing this overall color, and that will soften those a little bit. And then now that I have these kind of set up, I'm going to go back to my scene here, and I can just play with first the materials here just to drag stuff over and see if there's something that I like better than others. So this one's pretty good. It's giving me some nice happy accidents of geometry here, so I'm getting this kind of stipulation through here. I can try some of these other ones, like this Ronin one that you can get on the cloud. I use a lot for metals, so if I ever have something with metal, I'll often use that. There's some other ones like this pewter, which is pretty good. And then I have some other ones that I've made, and these I've just called happy accidents. I haven't uploaded these to the Keyshot cloud yet, but these I was using for those knives. I did a series of knives for ZClassroom, and I use these quite a bit on those, and I've just labeled them happy accidents. And so what these do is when I apply these materials, they're going to look at the topology of the mesh, and they end up focusing on that and kind of spiking it. And this gives me some really cool kind of design elements here. So let me see if I can rotate the light here so you guys can see this a little bit better. And this will end up giving me kind of the topology areas on the model will start showing. This may be a little hard for you guys to see because it does need to clear up a little bit. But you can see it's actually reaching in and grabbing some of those topology elements. Let's see if I can find another environment. I'm not feeling this one, it's a little bit too dark. My go-to forest road isn't on here. But this will give me some interesting elements of that stuff. And so that's basically what I end up doing. I'll get it in here, I'll apply one that I like, and then I'm gonna break the links between the materials. So right now everything's linked. All these objects are linked together. And I wanna break them now. And so I'll come over here to this area, I'm gonna select all these subtools, and then right click and go to material, and then do unlink material. And that's now gonna unlink everything. So they're no longer gonna be instanced. So what this means is I can now drag another material to that part. So let's find that wheel, right? We talked about it being blades. And so now that wheel is getting that lighting information, and it's now generating using this material instead of the body. And so I'll go through and play with these and drag these across my surfaces and just test these out, right? And see what I get. Now at this stage you have a few different options. I could go back into ZBrush and I can break these models up a little bit more so I have more subtools. And if you have more subtools, this dragging process is going to be a little more complex because you're going to drag multiple things to an object, but it gives you more control. So if you have more parts, you're gonna be able to apply different materials to those parts. If you have one large part, you're gonna be able to apply like one material. However, if you have something like this and I want to say, use this material, but I wanna add some different stuff to it, you don't have to split up your model per se. You could also do compositing on top of this to get the result you're looking for. And what that means is that I can take this, I can apply one solid material to the entire thing. Then I can apply another material to the entire thing. Then I can apply another material to the entire thing. And every time I apply that new material, I generate an image, okay? So I'd have 3 or 4 images that would just contain these different render processes. And an example of this, let me go down here and see if I can find this quick. And this is gonna give you, you're gonna have less time on the modeling side of stuff, but more time on the painting side of stuff to get this kind of to work. But if you do it, so you have kind of an option. You can go down either route right now is what I'm trying to say. So you can go either and do your time spent in a 2D aspect where you're compositing in 2D, or spend your time compositing in 3D where you have your models split up. So it's really up to you at this stage what you kind of want to do with that. And I have some examples here. Let me see if I can get these big for you guys. Let's see here. View, extra large icons. So you can see here's passes right here. So I have this car, and this car. And I've just taken this car and I've rendered it 3 times. And this is so 1 pass, 2 pass, and 3 pass. And then I can take those and I can actually use those to composite. So what I did with this one here, this was one I just mocked up yesterday. I got through and this was the result of that. And this was just with passes. So I just took the passes and rendered them out. Another thing inside of Keyshot you can do is you can apply labels, and labels are really fun to play with too. So like things like this, you can just drag out PNG files on top of it, and it's going to allow you to break up your mesh too. And you can break this up into not only just like a decal format where the material is the same, but you can change the entire material on the label. So if I go back to Keyshot here, I can show a quick example of this too. So say like this body, you know, right now it's all this one single element. So I can right click on this and go to edit material. And then in here there's a labels tag. And then in here I can add a label. And you can add a label as a different material. So I come here and say just add label texture. And then I have some of these. Let's see if I can find them here. Let's go to desktop. And these are just PNGs. And so let's say, let me grab this one here. And this is going to allow me to get this label. And now with this label, I can change my mapping type to say camera. And then there's a position texture option. I can click that. And now I can click and this will change the position of that label. And so now I'm getting this kind of result, right? So I've just taken this model that was just static, one material, and I've added a label on it, but now I'm getting a different breakup. Now you can change this label and modify it. So I can change the width, I can change the height, I can change the angle. the size, all sorts of different things. And as you do this, you're now adding another element to it, right? You can also blend this label with color. So I can come down here and I can blend it. So if I didn't want it to be white, it's now going to be black. And now I'm getting an offset again on this. This is a little bit difficult to see here. This HDRI is pretty dark. Let's see if I can change that. We'll go to Studio. Where are you at, Startup? See if this helps. And so now you can see the breakup between materials. So I have that one that was picking up those elements there, and then this one is now coming in solid. So I have a file that I've already gone through and kind of modified on this. So let's open that up so you guys can see a little bit different aspect of this. So this car I'd come through and manipulate a little bit more. I'll probably finish the render of this because I like the tire designs on this and I want to modify it some. But let's load an example of that other one. So this is the other one that's in Keyshot here. And so you can see my breakup on this is a few more subtools here. And then these have labels applied. And so you can also overlap labels. So this mountain here is overlapping this one. And now you can blend two labels together and get a different result, right? And then the glass materials I'll use quite a bit. This also gives another element of kind of translucency or shininess on a mesh too. And so using things like glass will often break up that mesh as well. And then you can see this one's got like that reflection in the window, and so you can come through and start modifying that too. Now, once again, all these designs I tend up doing usually just focusing on one angle. So if I rotate this car around, it's going to look god awful, but that's kind of the process I'll do on that. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you guys, and that's in relation to this kind of stuff right here, this happy accident of this kind of triangulation. So I'm going to hop over to ZBrush quick and show you this one last thing. So this is a fun thing to do. I'm forcing ZBrush to break, and it's giving me a design that I like, okay? So I'm going to quick save this one more time so I don't lose it. And now I'm going to go back into Lightbox here, and I have one of these already kind of stored out. So we'll go to Concept Car here. And here we have my spike car. And if I zoom this out, you can see this is what this model looked like inside of ZBrush, okay? So I had the car. This was used all with the project primitives. So this is what those designs I was getting out of that, right? So I'm just taking this and I'm pushing the geometry to the limit. And then these cuts were made with just Boolean objects. So the same process we already covered. I've gone through and manipulated the object. I then ran dynamesh on it, so it kind of fixed those errors. I did a little inflate, because this was basically paper thin through there. So I inflated it, and then I went in with large-scale Boolean objects and cut some of these parts out, and that gave me that shape. You can see this is just what that wheel was for this design, right? So nothing crazy. It's that just a cylinder shape, and then I added, say, that little process there to give me this kind of little element there, and then I added another cylinder, and got that shape there. The front's the same way, so just cylinder objects, and then these are just Booleans cut out. And so we're not talking about a lot of complexity here to get this design. Now, this was the final image of that again. What does it look like? So it went from that to this, right? So that's very simplistic shapes, and just with rendering and some lighting and then some labels, I've totally taken it to another level. So you can definitely do, very simplistic things and still get a lot out of it. Now, the thing I want to show you is these spikes. And so for the spikes, I forced ZBrush to error, okay? And so here's a little trick to do that. It's really fun. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure my topology is not too crazy, because basically I'm going to go through and I'm going to destroy this thing, and triangles are going to shoot everywhere, but I don't want it to be too dense. So if the model's dense, like this is pretty dense here, we're going to have to reduce it. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to use zremesher on this part. And we're just going to use defaults and just remesh this. I see Paul is in here. They're talking about my swell bottle and how I use the dishwasher on it. So Tagarity's asking, Keyshot is expensive. Is there other rendering programs out there? So we do have a version of Keyshot you can get with the bridge, and that is reduced quite a bit in terms of price. And with that, the only real caveat is that you have to send models from ZBrush to it. You can't import models from Keyshot itself. So if you have it and you go and say import from Keyshot, you have to use the bridge. You won't be able to import an OBJ, an STL, anything like that into Keyshot. You have to use you have to have ZBrush and use the ZBrush to Keyshot Bridge to send that model. But the cost on that is reduced, so it's not the $3,000. I can't fully remember what it is exactly, but it's listed on our Pixologic store. So if you just do search for Pixologic store and then the ZBrush version of Keyshot, it'll have it on there. Another question, Keyshot 5, is there a lot of changes? Is it worth the upgrade? It's up to you. It runs a little faster, definitely, for sure. Some of the other things I haven't really dived into, so I can't really say fully if it's worth to go the upgrade. But for most packages and all software, like usually they upgrade for a reason, so there's probably stuff in there that's going to help you out, speed up your workflows and your pipelines. So you could always just download the demo of it and try it out, which is what I was running there. That's just the Keyshot demo for 9, and you can just go to their website and download the trial. You'll get it for, I think, 14 days, maybe it might be 7 to 14 days, and you can experiment and see if it's worth doing the upgrade or not. Saeed's asking if there's a way to spin a 3D model. If you're referring to Keyshot, you can. The professional version of Keyshot, which is the more expensive one, has an option to allow you to spin it. You can rotate in Keyshot and rotate it around. It's just when it's in that mode, it's previewing, and so it's basically not going to give you a clearer version of your model as you rotate around it. So what you would need to do is you need to render out those frames. It's just like a normal kind of rendering package. All right, so now that I've decimated this, or zremeshed this, you can see how well zremesher did on this. So it did an excellent job. So this is the result I got from that topology. This is what I had, right? So we're at 656,000 points, and then this is the result. So now the trick to destroy this is first I'm going to go to the tool palette up to the top here. I'm going to go down to the morph target area. We're going to locate that. Let me close some of these. And in the morph target area, I'm going to store a morph target. Okay? So morph targets in ZBrush are just calculating the position of all the vertices on the mesh. And this allows you to make a change, and then you can return those vertices positions back to where they were. Now morph targets only work if the vertex count does not change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force ZBrush to change that vertex count, and then I'm going to apply the morph, and it's going to destroy the model. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and drag this out and just isolate part of this. I'm going to hold Control and Shift and drag out so it's red. I'm just hiding part of this model. Now you'll notice that when this part of the model is hidden, the morph target option is still active. So this is still giving me this delete morph target. If you do some other processes like convert it to different geometry or everything else, it's going to destroy your morph target. However, just hiding isn't going to destroy your morph. And with this, just hiding a little bit, I can hide any part of my model here, right? It's going to allow me now, when I apply this morph target, it's going to shatter the mesh. Since those vertices changed, it's going to shatter. So if I come over here and click and drag, you see now I'm going to get this crazy happy accident, right? So now I've taken that mesh and I've generated this result. And recently, this has been more of the stuff I've been kind of experimenting with, like taking meshes and destroying them. Because one thing that's weird, or that I like with the destroyed states of stuff, is the clarity of them, right? So it's taking the geometry and it's spiking it to the point where every single one of those spikes is crystal clear, right? So you're ending up with these really sharp edges and really sharp designs. So just taking, say, the morph width here and adding that, now look at this stuff, this cool stuff I'm getting here, right? So now I can go back and say, take this, right? I've now added these crazy spikes, and then now let's send that to Keyshot. So we're gonna have Keyshot active, send it over, and let's see what we get with that. Digital Plankton does Keyshot do free updates like ZBrush? I believe the answer is no on that. ZBrush is one of the few packages that we've never charged for an upgrade. There's not too many others out there that run that same process. All right, so here's my crazy car here. And you can see it came over to Keyshot. And so yes, you can rotate around inside of Keyshot here. You just see it's not gonna be as fluid because it's rendering in real time as you do this. And then once again, I usually come over and I have all these kind of happy accident materials. So I'm gonna apply those to this. And you'll see the craziness and kind of design values I get out of this now. So this is, my surface before was looking like pretty plain, right? So it was just like a solid surface. But now just taking that geometry, breaking it using the morph target there, now look what I'm getting for that surface, right? Now I have this really cool effect, this whole new textured type element on my mesh. And all I did was destroy the topology. So these are things that I've been doing recently, kind of experiments and playing with. because it gives this kind of nice quality that I may not have came across otherwise by myself. And it just ends up being these nice happy accidents. So they're kind of controlled happy accidents because I know they're going to happen. And then I'm using it to my advantage to get a result. So another cool little trick there that I use quite a bit, especially for this car stuff recently, because it just adds another element there. And now I've got that nice kind of crazy tessellated design texture pattern. All right, a few more questions here, and then that will pretty much end it. So one question here, will Bridge work with Core? Yes, it will. So you can use the Bridge with ZBrush Core. Dougie's saying that his models look very bad, very, very bad in Keyshot. So one thing that, just don't try to go too crazy with Keyshot 2. Like, you can use it to effect where you can just add lighting to it. And adding lighting, you know, if you have a light phasing front on a model, it's going to look totally different than if you have it just offset. And so what I do is often I'll just take a mesh and I'll just, you know, change the lighting on it and it'll already improve it. So don't try to get too saturated in Keyshot, and then downloading just simple materials from the Keyshot cloud, like those ones from Nacho, who also does really nice ZBrush jewelry, helps quite a bit in just applying stuff. Let's see what else we got here. Questions. Digital plankton icing, can you also deform the shattered mesh and twist it, stretch it, so it goes full extract? By all means you can. So I'm just going to close this out in Keyshot here. So this is still, it's a shattered version here, right? But it's still just a mesh inside of ZBrush. So I can use definitely, you know, move, scale, and rotate here and use this, move it around. I can also come in to say the Gizmo 3D and activate, you know, the deformer. Make sure I get everything back here. So you can use any of that stuff in there. Now, the quality level and what you're going to get when you do this may vary because I've now taken that model and completely destroyed it. But you can definitely modify this. It's still geometry. It's just distorted geometry, right? So it's just taken those triangles and just made a mess out of stuff. What else do we have here? So Root is asking, is there any tutorials recommended for beginners in Keyshot? Unfortunately, I'm not sure. So I've done quite a few just in terms of just ZBrush usage. So we've showed the bridge at the summit when we announced it, and there's a short tutorial on that. We also have one on ZClassroom you can follow along with. But as for like in-depth stuff, you'd have to check on Luxion's site and see if there's anything there. I don't have any that I recommend personally. I just end up, you know, the ones I've done, we've only done a few, but that's just mostly showing the bridge and the functionality of it. And it doesn't really get depth into Keyshot at all because we don't make Keyshot. So we just partnered with them for the bridge. Is there any way to get... So Pickle Rick Pirate is asking, is there any way to get good reference images for practicing sculpting busts? So the best ones you're going to get is if you take them yourself, because then you can control the camera angles and things like that. The other people that do a lot of realistic sculpting for faces and features, they just scour the web and just try to pull them from there. Movies, surprisingly, are probably some of your best ways to get images of actors and references because they'll be in a scene and they're moving, right? And so you'll see their head turn. And if you can frame it to like that one scene, right? And you have an actor that's like this, and then he's like this, and he's like this, and he's talking or doing something, you're gonna get multiple angles of that actor at that same camera angle, okay? And that's gonna be your biggest thing because oftentimes, you know, every time you change a scene, the camera's gonna be different. Every time a photographer takes a photo, especially if you're looking at headshots of somebody at some gala or something like that, the angle of the lens and everything is going to be different. So if you don't have that information, you're not going to line them up completely. But just taking like stills of movies, if you can find one shot that the actor's doing a bunch of movements so you can get different angles, use those as reference, is going to be your best bet. Tangent here, how can I add custom lights to the ZBrush to Photoshop CC? So they should be, basically what the lights is going to use, it's going to look at the lights that are up here. If you replace those lights in that folder, it should end up working and using those instead. What I'd actually do, Hutchins, is to send it, if you can't get it to work, just try replacing the ones that are already there. Don't just add custom ones, replace the ones that are there and see if that works. If not, I'd suggest clicking on this link up here in help for the Pixologic support site and submit a ticket and just tag my name in that ticket. And we'll see if we can get that working for you. But it should be allowing you to add custom lights. You just can't add them though. You have to actually replace the ones that are in there. There is a README file that should kind of explain that as well. So Dougie is asking about rotating human eyes. So I can show this one quick. So there's actually a little macro up here that'll create some eyes for you too. So if you go to append eyes, it's gonna make a new subtool. And you'll get two little eyeballs. And these are gonna be set up with a skin shade 4 material. So let's say these are my eyes, and I'm rotating them, and I'm positioning them. And now I'm gonna add some pupils. So I'm just sculpting in on these. All right, now I have these and I wanna rotate them, right? So one thing I'd suggest for this is first activate symmetry. And this is gonna allow you to rotate like this. If they're rotating weirdly, activate this local symmetry over here. And now this should allow you to rotate those eyes individually. Is that kind of what you're asking there, Doug? So just try to make sure when you activate symmetry, you have the gizmo centered over this. If you have symmetry off and you activate, it's gonna put it in the middle, and then that's not gonna allow you to do it. So make sure you have symmetry on, go to unmask mesh center. You can activate local symmetry, and then now you should be able to rotate those eyes, and they should rotate mirrored. If you're trying to rotate them in currently the same way, you're gonna have to do it kind of manually, or rotate one and then duplicate it over. There's also an option in transform where there's a mirror symmetry. This actually might give you what you want. And now I'll allow you to do that. There you go. So activate symmetry, go to transform, turn off mirror symmetry. And now when you mirror, it won't do it symmetrical. And now you can make them eyes do whatever you want. So try that. All right. So project primitive, Fixie's asking what happens if I use project primitive with that shattered mesh. It's probably gonna be a disaster. Let's see what it does. Let's try it. It works, but it's making a disaster. Let's reset this to full reset, get that circle there. You got some interesting stuff. You're never gonna be able to use the boolean with this, but you can definitely use this as 2D elements, right? So ZBrush will run it. You can render it in here. So it'll work. Still seeing it as a mesh. It's just not the most pretty thing. But you can get some happy accidents out of that for sure. Nazumi's asking, could you at least consider a plugin that would export passes to Affinity Photo? So try, potentially. It depends what the problem with a lot of the stuff for those other applications is there's no way to really script it. So the thing is, it would need some interface that could be scripted too. I use Infinity Designer quite a bit. So yeah, definitely Affinity products would be something that I'd be interested in making something for. But to my knowledge, there's no format for scripting stuff inside of Affinity Photo. I could be wrong. It's been a little while since I've checked. But if that is available, kind of like how Photoshop's scripting stuff kind of works, it could definitely be done for sure. Digital Plank Design, can you add small lights in a ZBrush scene that glow? So kind of, there is a glow material you can use with Best Render. You could also just make like a full bright material, but in terms of like glow, Paul may have some solutions on that for you, but in general, it's not going to give you kind of glow you want. I usually end up, if I need a glow, I'll generate as a flat color and then isolate that color and say Photoshop and apply a glow filter there. You can, however, now that I think about it, you can get a glow with the BPR filters. So the BPR filters do have a glow one in there, and you can actually get a glow off of that. So let me just double check to make sure it's there. So if I come down here and we'll turn on that filter, there is a glow filter in here, and this will allow you to set, you know, basically a color that you can grab in your scene, and then you can set it to glow. You can also set it as a material and it'll glow. So that would be your best bet on getting a glow. So yes, you can get a glow, use the BPL filters, and use the glow option. So I usually end up with taking this, I'll fill something with red and then set that color to glow, and then you can replace the color of that. But if you use like a red or like a full green somewhere, you can then apply the glow. So yes, you can make stuff glow. BPR filters. All right, Doug, glad that helps. So Jack is asking what would be the equivalent of Keyshot. So the equivalent I would use for that for game ready assets would be Marmoset. Marmoset toolbag is another great way to render stuff. And that will also accept, pretty decent resolution models too. I've sent million poly models in there too, and you can apply PBR texturing to those and things like that. So that would be where I'd go for that. There's a bunch of robust stuff in there. We don't have a bridge that goes directly to it, but you can export out like a FBX through the export option up here, or using the FBX plugin here, and send your model to, say, Marmoset toolbag and render in there. Marmoset toolbag is also like extremely cheap. I think they run sales all the time too. You can get it, I think, down, I don't know what the price point is right now, but it's a great tool to have, especially for generating game resolution assets. For web etching, asking for 3D printing, how can I measure the height of my model? So web etching, I'll have another Ask ZBrush video this week that'll go through some of that size scale stuff too. But basically for measuring size, you want to go to the Z plugin and use the Scale Master plugin here, and this will allow you to see the sizes of your mesh. So you can set a scene scale, which will set the scene inside of ZBrush for that certain scale. And then you can set the sliders to subtool size, and it'll show you the size of the mesh in that scale. And then you can also use the transpose line, and as you drag this out up here at the top, it's going to tell you a value, and that will also allow you to measure. There will be a Ask ZBrush video that should be coming out hopefully in the next few days that will have how to create a box at a certain size dimension, and then you can I'll show briefly how to use that transpose line to measure, and also using the Scale Master plugin for scale. But you can look up, there's a video on Scale Master too. Let's go over here. Let's see if we can find that quick. Just do like a YouTube search for and there's a video that will cover the functionality of it, and this will answer a lot of those questions you have about the scale stuff. So this will go through the demonstration of that application. It'll talk about how scale works in ZBrush and how you can rescale a model to a certain size and then check it. So check that one out. It's just on it's on our site as well. Just search Scale Master Pixologic ZBrush plugin. And here, I think I can share this too. And put that there for you guys. And yes, Randy's also bringing up that the third Joe, so Joe Mena, and then Joe from So Much ZBrush. He has a bridge too you can look at as well that will bridge stuff from ZBrush to it. So you can go to his website and download that too. For printing, there's a lot of different possibilities for that. Basically, you just need to export out. So web etching is asking, how can I print parts of my model? So that's a whole nother thing as well. But basically, you just need to have a mesh that is watertight, and then you can export out that file as a STL or an OBJ generally is what they're used, and then put it into a slicer application and then 3D print from that. There's a bunch of videos online. There's a bunch of Ask videos, ZBrush stuff on creating meshes solid for printing too. So just do a search on that on YouTube. Saeed's asking, we got one more here. Is there a way to change the position of all subtools in the position palette? So there is, let me think here. You can reposition stuff here using this. You can also, if you have multiple subtools, like say I have my car here, the best way to do that if you want to position everything, it's not going to give you a position slider, but if you go to the draw or go to move, scale, and rotate, make sure you have the Gizmo 3D active. Make sure you're not in a projection primitive. In here, there's this little icon that's called Transpose All Selected Subtools, and if you turn this on, you can then move all the subtools so you can reposition them that way. You won't end up getting a type-in value for that position, but you can use the Gizmo 3D to position, and you can position, scale, and rotate with that. And that's just this Transpose All Selected Subtools option here. For more information on that, just do a Google search for Ask ZBrush Transpose All Selected Subtools, and that should give you some information too. There's been a few of those where I've gone through and showed the process of selecting, unselecting, and I think ZClassroom has some too as well. Well, thank you all for showing up for the stream today. I hope that you guys and gals got some information out of the projection primitive. I don't think I missaid it too many times. I know I did a few times call it the project primitive, but it's actually projection primitive. And so I hope that helps. And I'll be back on Wednesday next week, and then I believe Friday as well for the next two ones. Next Wednesdays, I think I'm doing 3D printing stuff. So we'll work on, I think I'm gonna make a mug and then also a little elephant pendant. So we'll cover some of that 3D printing stuff in there. So if you guys have interest in that, we'll definitely talk about the scale stuff in that one too. So that'll be next Wednesday, and it should be at the same time. So I think that is it. You all have a safe weekend as well, and stay safe. And till next time, me and my swell bot are going to go visit the dishwasher. Thank you all. Take care. Now let me find if I can get my mouse over there. There we go.